restore the soul of America. We have been here before. The history of America is not a fairy tale. It's not a fairy tale. The fact of the matter is we've always had this fight between good and evil. The evil part has been a minority. But when you give it any oxygen, when you give it any light, when you give it any embrace, it comes out from under the rocks and is dangerous.
Welcome back. That was former Vice President Joe Biden during a campaign stop in Miami last week. Biden remains ahead of his Democratic rivals in the polls, but Elizabeth Warren is creeping closer. Joining me this morning to discuss the presidential race and Florida's role in it is Politico's man in Miami, Marc Caputo. Marc, thank you for coming in.
Well, thanks for having me.
You've been covering the Biden campaign for Politico. I listened to that speech. I wasn't there. I know you were there, but I listened to what he said in Miami, and there were times where it was kind of a rambling speech he was giving.
Right. Almost everyone who hears Joe Biden speak for an extended period of time says that he's rambling. Now, having covered him on the campaign trail in Iowa and New Hampshire, I can say that this was Joe Biden that is more cogent. So if you think he's rambling now, well, you know, on those campaign trail visits, there's a lot more rambling, but that's because there's more time. Now, the thing about this event in Miami is it was at the Ball and Chain in Little Havana in September. It was hot. So the heat was really a limiting factor. And his campaign likes to point out, and some of his supporters had pointed out to me, like he lifted a lot of those kids you see in the background up on stage. So they're trying to portray his virility in part because there have been questions about his vitality, his mental state, his stamina, his age.
So how do you see the race at this point? You know, it seems as if Biden has been fairly consistent. You know, there's been some concern from his campaign that the press keeps wishing or waiting for him to start dropping in the polls as if it's supposed to become some sort of self-fulfilling prophecy here. But he doesn't seem to be growing, but he doesn't seem to be shrieking too much either.
Right. I think another way to say that is he has kind of flatlined as far as his support is concerned. In April, before he first got in, his average poll numbers had kind of aggregated and averaged out to about 30 points, and now they're about 28 nationwide. Now, these are just general polls that we're talking about nationwide. They really don't matter when it comes to, say, either the Electoral College or the primary because of the first 4 early states. But as your intro pointed out, Elizabeth Warren is rising. And I happen to know a pollster who said that some recent polling he's done has shown more of an image hit for Biden. That's partly in line of what you're saying, the Biden campaign complaining about media coverage. But usually when people complain about media coverage, regardless of the politician or the party, it's because they're just complaining about the truth. And in this case, he has exposed himself to a lot of criticism, and it's been covered. Generally, if a candidate doesn't want to be criticized, well, number one, the first thing you don't want to do is run, and the second thing you don't want to do is don't do things that merit criticism.
It's interesting because right now the president is undergoing a controversy over the whistleblower complaint, which supposedly we're trying to read tea leaves to understand that it may have involved President Trump trying to get the Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden. I don't know if that's going to turn out to be true or not, or if there's anything there. The question I have is, does that help or hurt Biden in some ways in the sense of, one, it sort of shows Donald Trump being Donald Trump and trying to work the edges of the election, but also you don't want to be in the news as being potentially part of some scandal either.
That's true. I would urge people, certainly in a case that involves a national security whistleblower and the issue of leaks and lots of anonymous voices and sources. So let's take a breath. Let's wait to see what the facts say before we can start to assess its impact on any of the candidates or American public opinion.
I want to sort of focus in on Florida for a second. You know, we're seeing these candidates visiting Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, some of the early states, and it always raises a question in my mind as to what role, if any, Florida is likely to play in the primary process. Our primary comes later in the lineup. Our primary is March 17th, which is after Super Tuesday. So a lot of delegates will have already been divvied up. We see candidates in Florida. Often it's because they do an event here, but they really come in for fundraising because there's a lot of money here. How important a role do you think Florida could end up playing in the primary process of selecting a candidate?
Well, it is a question of possibility. It could play a very big role simply because we have so many candidates and still a field where there's not a clear front runner, that if there are in the four early states divided winners. That is, if candidate A wins in Iowa and candidate B wins in New Hampshire and candidate C in Nevada and candidate D in South Carolina, well, then Super Tuesday becomes very important, and then the states after it do. There's a possibility that this could be a brokered convention simply because of the size of the field, the strength and quality of the candidates. Biden is not really that far out front, but he's certainly well known. Elizabeth Warren has built a monster of an early organizing effort in some of those three of those early states. And then Bernie Sanders has a really loyal following. He's built to go quite a distance. I'm not going to say necessarily be the nominee. So those top three candidates have to be taken seriously. The possibility of a brokered or a contested convention does as well. Now, if you want to know my personal opinion, I would say let's wait a little while, see some more polling, and, well, let's see what the first 2 or 3 early states say.
I'm going to now let's jump ahead to November 2020, regardless of who the Democrat is running against Donald Trump in Florida. I think there's, again, this perception. We just interviewed Nikki Fried a second ago. She's the only statewide elected Democrat. She won by some 66,000 or so votes. You know, this is always a state that runs close, but it runs close, and then it sort of, at the last minute, sort of dips over to the Republicans. Certainly the president has a lot going for him in Florida, having Ron DeSantis, having sort of, you know, his campaign manager, Brad Parscale, now makes Florida his home. So there are a lot of things on the positive side, but at the same time, they've shaken up their campaign organization here in Florida and got rid of their top campaign person, Susie Wiles, in Florida. How is the president doing in Florida?
Well, if you look at the polling, he's doing rather well as far as compared to how he looked in 2016. He's not above water. That is, he's not more liked than disliked, but he's roughly equivalent to where he was in 2016. But the story we wrote in Politico on Friday was about this bizarre shakeup, I think, as you accurately describe it. Susie Wiles was a top Florida advisor for the Trump campaign. She was brought on when no one thought Trump could win, and well, Trump won. Now, Susie Wiles and everyone who's a Republican consultant, even a Democratic consultant, say, look, you know, Susie Wiles isn't the one who won that, but Trump was. But interestingly enough, when Ron DeSantis looked like he was a definite loser in Florida in 2018, about a month before the campaign, he brought in Susie Wiles, and then he won an unexpected victory. And in 2010, when Rick Scott thought he wouldn't win, he had Susie Wiles, and he won. So this is a very skilled and talented woman who knows her business. So the fact that she got purged, in part because she ran afoul of the governor, and we can't quite understand why. He appears to blame her for a leak of sensitive documents, suggesting that he was involving in sort of a pay-for-play operation where special interests would give him money to go play golf with him, that he seemed to start to really dislike her and blame her for that leak. And he personally picked up the phone, or in a conversation with Brad Parscale, Trump's campaign manager, the governor of Florida basically got this woman fired. So it's kind of an interesting thing in Tallahassee right now. And, well, there's a lot of money that's involved, a lot of personalities, and a lot of politics, and the story isn't over.
We just have about a minute and a half or so to go. I don't want to let this week go without acknowledging the passing of Maurice Ferré. Maurice, you and I both covered Maurice during different times of his career. I came to Miami in 1991. He had already been mayor of the city of Miami for 12 years, from 73 to 85. When I came in, he then became a county commissioner, and he was always one of those smart players on the county commission. Larry Hawkins, Joe Gersten, Art Thiel, Alex Pinellas, you know, always vying. It was an interesting time to watch that. But he was always a gentleman, too. He oversaw a great transition, the first Hispanic mayor of Miami.
Yeah. His career actually spent more decades than that. He wound up supporting Rick Scott and was, I think, on the Transportation Authority or whatever it's called here now. So Maurice Ferré's his legacy is one of kind of the first real big city, serious, modern mayor of Miami. And being a mayor during the era of the cocaine wars is probably an interesting distinction. I think my only regret with Maurice was not asking him about it.
Right. No, yeah, you know, we had a lot of conversations, and he certainly managed all that flow of all those cocaine dollars into Miami that Bill Brickell, you know, during his time, they used to say the city mascot was the crane, the bird for the city of Miami was the building crane, you know. But, you know, he also, it's interesting, he almost was like the palate cleanser, the amuse-bouche, as you will, for Hispanic, you know, takeover of Miami, going from Puerto Rican, from an old southern town, to suddenly an Hispanic from Puerto Rican ancestry, paving the way for Cuban Americans to now be the dominant force.
Right. One of the things that I thought was interesting about Maurice Ferré was that he was he was tireless in the way in which he always boosted the city. And if you look at the city now, it's true, Mayor Diaz, the father of Miami's head coach now, I guess, you know, the namesake of Miami's head coach, University of Miami, he gets a lot of the credit for the way modern Miami looks. But if it wasn't for Maurice Bocchino, this city wouldn't look the way it is. It wouldn't act the way it does.
Yeah, we miss you, Maurice. All right, we'll be right back after the break.